Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 30th day of May in the year of our Lord 2025. I will be talking about the war between India and Pakistan, which began over an apparent terrorist attack in the disputed territory of Kashmir a few weeks ago. Yes, rather than hide or bury the lead, as they say, I will tell you right away that there is no real winner as yet. No real winner in this war, but in the initial battle, the winner was China. And in this report, I will attempt to defend that view. First, to set up my argument, it will be necessary to review a little history. It is often said that generals fight the last war, and in many respects, I believe that to be an accurate assessment. For example, coming out of World War I, the navies of the world viewed the battleship as the future of naval warfare because it had proven so decisive in the naval battles of that war. The air arm of the Navy didn't begin until the 1920s. That was just a primitive experiment. In the 1930s, seagoing nations started to develop aircraft and aircraft carriers and to experiment with them, but the battleship was still expected to dominate the next naval war. Even the Japanese put their effort into battleships, including the Yamato, the world's largest battleship. When the war started with the attack on Pearl Harbor and then the Battle of the Coral Sea and then Midway, it was soon obvious that aircraft carriers were the future, not battleships. The U.S. had 3 carriers in the Pacific after Pearl Harbor, and the Yorktown was lost at Midway, June 4, 1942, leaving only 2, but within 2 years, they had 17. When the war ended and the U.S. had the world's money so it could buy anything, it continued to put its effort into the ships that won the war in the Pacific. When nuclear power entered the Navy, the cost of an aircraft carrier skyrocketed. Until today, it exceeds $13 billion. Only one nation can afford to build and equip 13 of those $13 billion ships, and as a result, the U.S. Navy has dominated the seas since World War II. Other nations, such as China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, had to find some cheaper way to keep up to compete, and they did. While the U.S. was building $13 billion aircraft carriers to project U.S. power around the world, those nations devoted their resources to building relatively cheap missiles to counter them. My theory then is that the aircraft carrier, like the battleship before it, has had its day, and the future of warfare will be robotic, AI-generated, probably in space. With that background, we look at what is happening in one of the most dangerous corners of the world today, that is Kashmir, where the borders of Pakistan, India, and China all converged. The immediate cause of the outbreak of war was a terrorist attack on April 22nd that killed 26 Indians. People tend to get really upset when they're attacked by terrorists. They demand their nation's government do something. The Indians did do something. That resulted in one of the most interesting air battles since World War II. During the Battle of the Coral Sea in 1942, the U.S. and Japanese navies fought a battle in which each side had ships sunk, but the opposing ships didn't even see each other. The battle was entirely between carrier-based aircraft from about 200 miles apart. The Indians and the Pakistanis engaged in an air battle using the latest fighter aircraft in their inventories, and the interesting thing is that the entire battle was fought in what pilots call BVR, or Beyond Visual Range Combat. BVR is completely different from the air combat maneuvering and the dogfighting videos we see from World War II. It pits aircraft, their radars, their guided missiles against each other at extremely long range. Each aircraft tries to acquire radar lock on his opponent before the opponent can acquire him, and then he fires a missile on that radar lock guide straight to the other aircraft. The French built formidable weapon systems. They tend to do that. They build the defense mechanisms to protect those systems. For example, the French built the air defense system used by Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War. The U.S. was finally able to persuade the French to reveal the best countermeasures to that system. Now, international conglomerates build weapon systems for everybody. So sometimes it's hard to know all the players, but in Kashmir it was a little more clear. That's because The Pakistanis used Chinese missiles and, most importantly, the Chinese integrated air combat system incorporated into their own combat system. The Indians used primarily French equipment, especially the Dassault Rafale fighter, which French reports sometimes refer to as a flying masterpiece. The Rafale is a 4.5 generation aircraft, meaning it's reported to be superior to the fourth generation fighters, but not quite the fifth generation. It's a multi-role fighter capable of speeds of 1.8 Mach, and it has stealth capability, at least partially. Well, the Indians did retaliate for the terrorist attack, which they believed to have originated from Pakistan. On the morning of May 7th, India launched what they called Operation Sindoor, consisting of missile and drone attacks on the ground targets inside Pakistan. This is where the story gets a little confusing because a third player enters the game. The Indians get aircraft from France primarily, but also from Russia, such as the MiG-29 and Su-30. Pakistan has some U.S. F-16s, but none were used in this battle. Back to history for a moment, folks, because this reminds me of how Nazi Germany entered the Spanish Civil War as a way to test their aircraft and pilots for the coming war in Europe. When World War II started in Europe, the German pilots were already experienced combat veterans. The Chinese apparently did the same thing with their integrated air combat system supplied to Pakistan. They supplied an entire integrated system, not just the aircraft, because the French Rafale was superior to the Pakistani jets, at least the French thought so. What happened in the air battle remains undisclosed and secret, I guess, but we know that they fought from behind their own borders and at ranges which at times exceeded 100 miles. The battle reports are very sketchy, and as a result, it's very difficult to learn exactly what happened, but apparently the Indian jets were able to destroy some Pakistani aircraft on the ground, but in the air it was a different story, apparently. Western news outlets, including the New York Times, the BBC, reported that the air battle showcased the increasing lethality of Chinese jets and missiles against Western aircraft. In other words, the Chinese have had little recent warfighting experience against peer rivals, so this was a chance for them to test their systems. The Chinese and Pakistanis have claimed 5 Indian jets destroyed in air combat while losing none of their own. 3 Rafales, 1 MiG-29, 1 Su-30, but it is not possible currently to confirm the accuracy of that. The 3 Rafales are reported as definite, with the other 2 as possibles. They were downed by Chinese J-10C aircraft armed with PL-15E long-range air-to-air missiles to the west. This says that after many years, many billions of dollars, along with much IT theft from the West, the Chinese were finally able to test in real combat, and the result was rather alarming. The Chinese Navy is acting as if this battle was definitive as to their superiority. They conduct naval drills across the Pacific. They've encircled Taiwan in drills from time to time as if to say it's a matter of not when, it's a matter of when, not if. China's focus on technology and economics leaves its new military systems largely untested in real-world combat, especially against an enemy as formidable as the U.S. Still, this Pakistani test was something for them to crow about. It was has apparently given them a high level of confidence. The Chinese aircraft company Chengdu Corporation has joined with Pakistan Aeronautical Complex to jointly develop the latest Chinese fighter, the JF-17. Is any of this good news for the West? I don't think so. But neither should we exaggerate. The Chinese have supplied Pakistan with entire systems of avionics, engines, and weapons, which all work together, and apparently the Indians were relying only on their 4.5 Gen fighter, the Rafale, not an integrated system. That reliance was proven to be not effective. The Chinese have put a lot of effort into making the Pakistani Air Force top of the line with training in how to use their systems. Other countries have reported problems with the Chinese equipment. Some have had to ground their Chinese jets because they could not get them to work properly within their own systems, but the Chinese Personal involvement with the Pakistani Air Force seems to have solved that concern. India and Pakistan, both countries today. But that's a relatively short development. Independence occurred for them in 1947 when Great Britain withdrew from colonial status, granted independence. The result has left a lot of disputed borders, a lot of unfinished business between the two countries. The current war is a long line of struggles over Kashmir. It's far more dangerous than ever because both countries are nuclear armed. Are they crazy enough to use nuclear weapons over a border dispute? I would never rule out the craziness of those who run countries. There seems to be something about power that drives people mad. And after all, what good's power if you don't use it? There are some very disturbing aspects to this war, if you want to call it that. It's fast escalating, just as the war in Ukraine escalated with new weapons, including drones, satellite surveillance, targeting, artificial intelligence, hypersonic missiles, some of which are nuclear capable. These systems have all been deployed. They weren't even available for the last India-Pakistan war, which ended about 2003. Escalation happens. It happens faster when new systems are deployed because there is a need to match or respond to them. For example, India is now in discussions to purchase the most advanced Russian S-400 missile defense system to counter the Chinese missiles. Another disturbing aspect of this struggle is that both countries have attacked inside the other country, far from the dispute in Kashmir, just as in Ukraine. I imagine that the leaders of both countries are working around the clock to find ways to destroy each other. Finally, folks, war is an idiotic trait of the depravity of man. This one is just a fine example of the early stages of the progression to the next level of technology in that depravity. At least that's the way I see it. Until next time, folks, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.